Today is April 17th, 2013. My name is Teresa Beer Larson. I'm in the home of Iveta Zeliadt. Iveta, thank you for letting me come to visit with you today.
You're welcome.
Do I have your permission to take your picture and record your voice today?
You certainly do.
Well, thank you very much. Please tell me when and where you were born.
I was born in Algona, Iowa, September 28th, 1922.
But shortly after that, your dad, who was a mechanic, came to Ames in 1924.
February.
February of 1924. Why did he come to Ames?
He went to work for the Iowa State Highway Commission.
And what was his job?
He was a mechanic for the big equipment.
He was handy with his hands.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that you lived in several houses in Ames. I know, first of all, you lived on Kellogg.
Right, 1400 block.
And then you went to South Maple.
Right.
And this is all before you went to school.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then tell me about your dad, who was very handy, building your house on Marston.
Yes, they bought a lot on Marston, right north of Roosevelt School, in the 1000 block. And he and my grandfather built the home. And it was done on weekends and odd hours.
Did you move right into the home, or did you have to move into something else?
No, he built the garage first. And we lived in the garage. Then when he got the basement done, we lived in the basement. Then when he got one of the bedrooms done, we lived in the basement and slept upstairs. And then the house was enclosed and we were able to use most of it.
So this was a collaborative effort between your dad and your grandfather then to build this.
Until we had the house up, and then Mother had a lot to do with the stainings and different things that you could do on the interior, painting and...
Well, so we've now located you on Marston, and this is before you went to first grade, because I know you went to kindergarten a little bit at Whittier.
About 6 months
Mm-hmm.
at Whittier, and then I transferred to Roosevelt.
Okay. Well, tell me some of your very first memories about being in Ames. In just these very early years before you started grade school, what were some of your first memories?
Well, I remember living on Kellogg, and one of the funny part of living on Kellogg was there was a little boy across the street, and we couldn't go across the street. We were told not to. So we'd sit on the curb and throw crab apples back and forth.
And I know that in your early years in Ames, you had pneumonia.
Right, when I was 3.
And do you have any memories of that?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
What
I
happened?
remember waking up one morning and Dr. McFarland sitting right by my bed. He'd been there a number of hours.
For today's viewers and listeners, they're probably wondering, a doctor came to your house?
Right. Doctors made home visits. Right.
So you were not hospitalized then with your pneumonia?
No. It was $2 for a home visit and $1 for an office visit.
My goodness. And this was in, I'm just going to guess, 1925, 26, something like that?
Pretty much through to the 30s.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You could even go to the doctor's home.
Mm-hmm. So as a little child, did your mom let you play outside a lot? Did you kind of have the run of the neighborhood?
That's all we did was play outside. We didn't have other activities like the kids do today.
Did you play sports, or did you just have imaginative play?
We played a lot of games like statue, tag, run around. Of course, I was raised in a neighborhood that was just new. So there were a lot of basements around. And we run on those mounds like cowboy and Indians. It was kind of fun.
At that time, most mothers were at home, so there were probably lots of eyes on the street. That even though you were running everywhere, there were probably people looking out for you.
They knew where we were. And we were told where to stay and be inside at all times.
Good. We should mention that today, while we're talking, there's a pretty good thunderstorm going on, so that if people hear sounds, it could be part of the storm.
It could.
So let's start you at school at Roosevelt. And you made some fast friends at Roosevelt. You have some good friends from your Roosevelt days.
Yes. We were all close. And some of us went all through school together, graduated together.
And you have a friend to this day that you met as a first grader at Roosevelt.
This friend that you're speaking of, I met when she was 2 and I was 3.
Oh, even earlier than I thought.
Before we were even in school.
Mm-hmm.
And due to a social club that my mother belonged to. And we are still friends today. And that's been a number of years, 80-some years.
Well, that's something to treasure. I know as a youngster in Ames, there were opportunities to take advantage of some fun things that were happening on the campus. Now, I understand there were Easter egg hunts for children in the 5 to 10-year-old age group. What was that like?
Yeah, we had the run of the college. You could go out and they had Easter eggs planted everywhere. And you just tried to find them, and if you found one that had a marking on it, you could take it down to O'Neill's Dairy and get an ice cream bar, or maybe to one of the stores here in town and get a candy. And it was fun.
Now, did you go with your friends, or did you stay with your mom and dad when you did that?
No, they would drop us off and stay in the car and wait for us, and we would turn loose on campus. In those days, it was much safer.
So we're still thinking about your Roosevelt school time. What about Roosevelt school activities, classes or traditions? Anything you remember from that?
One thing I do remember, we used to have an art group, and this was done in the evening, and they would put pictures up on the walls, and we'd go around and name them. And of course, I know one year I won first and got a picture as a present.
Was it sort of an art appreciation? In other words, the great masterworks, that's what you were identifying?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And any teachers you remember, or any class things, either pleasant or unpleasant, at being at Roosevelt School?
I remember all my teachers when I was in grade school.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most of them in junior high. We did have a few that would change.
Mm-hmm.
But
how did they reward you for doing well in your schoolwork?
well, we had grades.
You had report cards?
We had report cards, and they were A, B, and C, D, and F. And I do remember in junior high, we were in different classes. We had 1, 2, 3, and 4 group. And so, but that was the only time that they were broken down.
So I know that you had some fun things that you did as a youngster that's not in school. I believe you joined Campfire.
Oh, I was in Bluebirds and Campfire and Rainbow Girls. The Methodist Church had a standard bear group, which we met once a month on a Saturday. And
you were busy.
Busy people.
Tell me a little bit about Campfire. You said you were Bluebird. Do you start that like second or third grade? Something?
Right, first grade.
First grade.
We started Bluebirds.
And was it a big group or a small group?
Oh, I would imagine we had about 12 girls.
Mm-hmm.
And Campfire the same. And we stayed out at Camp Kenwita. It was here at that time. Much newer. And we had hikes, and the dining area wasn't there until I was married, until they got the dining area.
Now, there were some ha-ha trees out there, weren't there?
Red hot.
Red hot.
Red hot trees, which we had fun when we went on the hikes. We could always pick red hots and eat them. Now you wouldn't do that.
And how did they taste like?
Like little crab apples, only they were much, much smaller.
And did you have some free time, like for swimming? And where did you go for swimming?
I took my lessons in swimming out at the college at what we called the old man's gym. At that time, it was just the men's gym. And I cannot remember the name of the instructors. That's what one of the things I wanted to do.
That's okay. So you learned how to swim there.
I was not a very good swimmer. I was not very like water.
But I understand that Cars Pool was available for children in Ames.
I did take some lessons out there later when I was older, but not when I was younger.
And in your later grade school years, or maybe junior high, were you allowed to ride your bikes out to Cars Pool?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. We did. A lot of times across town. We rode our bikes everywhere.
And what kind of street surfaces were there that you would ride on? Were they all paved, or was some?
No, cinders mainly for a long time, and then finally they would get the little hard rock surface with the edges on it, curb and gutter.
So in the 1930s and 40s, when you lived on Marston, your street, was it paved yet?
No.
No, it was cinder. Okay.
Pretty much in the 30s it got paved.
Mm-hmm.
But before that, no, it was cinder. For the matter of fact, Daddy didn't even finish the driveway because at the end of the driveway, then he would take out our ashes from our coal furnace. And that was a good way to dispose of those.
Well, before we move on, any early childhood things you want to tell us about before we move on to a little bit older? You think of anything right now?
Not that I can think of at the present time.
I know that dancing was a really important part of your life, so let's take time to talk about that. When did you start dancing lessons?
I think I was about 8 when I first started. And it was just taking dancing lessons is all. And then after I got older, then I went to dancing classes with Marjorie Bitten's studio. And we taught, she had a group of us, of girls, come up and help at night to teach the college students ballroom. And then I went on and learned more dancing from Marge and was an assistant instructor for about 4 years.
Were dancing lessons available to lots of people when you were a youngster at age 8, or were there only a few girls that might take dancing? I don't know how popular it was.
It was a popular activity, yes. There was quite a few of us.
And was there more than one dance studio?
Yes, eventually. I first started with Bill Patton. He had his studio in his home on 13th Street in Maxwell. And then it was with Marge. And then, of course, Ann Dirksen came.
So you probably tap dance, maybe gymnastics or something like that is what you learned first?
Right. Tapping was my first, and then
Did you do ballet as well?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
learn that. That is one of the things in dancing that you do. You learn more gracefulness that way.
And strength, too.
Well, it does help your legs get more strength.
So you probably had some fun recitals.
Yes, we did. They were all fun. However, you'd be just shaken when you go on the stage, you know.
And where did you perform?
Well, sometimes our recitals were all in the old high school, which is where the parking lot for City Hall is now. There was a auditorium there with a balcony and a stage, and so we had most of our recitals there because the high school was built my final year of high school, so this was all before.
And you probably had fun costumes for
Yes.
dance recitals?
They were all, the instructor would order the materials, so it was ordered out of dancing studio supplies.
And then your mom would have to make it?
My mother made a lot of them, and finally toward the end she decided that that was too much, and so she'd hire it made. But they were pretty tricky to make, you know.
I bet you had quite a collection of dance costumes.
Not too many.
Did they get worn out? Did you play with them after you?
No, I didn't, and I really don't know what happened to them. My mother probably destroyed them in the moves.
Well, so you mentioned kind of some junior high years, so we'll talk about junior high. You went to junior high in what building? Describe for us where that building.
In the old Central. That building had been condemned many years before we got there. For the matter of fact, the stairways were wooden, and they'd had the wooden dips in them where you put your shoes, and if anybody run in the building, it was liable to come right down on you. It was a fun school. I enjoyed it.
You had told me once that during your junior high years there was a particularly cold, icy winter.
Very, very cold winter. For the matter of fact, we ice skated to school for 1 solid week. That's how much ice was on the... And I lived approximately 10 blocks from school.
That was probably the safest way to get to school.
I'm sure without having... you slid most of the way if you didn't glide.
So you mentioned ice skating. Other places in Ames to ice skate in the winter?
We used to ice skate out on Lake Laverne. That's where the main part of the icing was done.
Mm-hmm. And lots of kids would come there.
Yeah, our downtown kids. We had the buses, to get out there, and very seldom anybody took us. We'd go on the bus out and the bus back. We'd go into the Memorial Union to get warm. And
now, go ahead.
The college students were on the ice too. And I met a few people there.
Did you maybe get a few dates by then?
I sure did. That was normal with teenagers.
That's fun. Did they have a warming hut or anything, or you had to
No,
go?
you had to go
inside.
The union.
Okay. And that was totally okay.
Yeah,
everybody could go in. That's okay.
They didn't mind it at all.
Yeah. Well, we're kind of talking here about the 1930s because by the time you were in junior high, the Depression had hit the United States pretty full on. How did it impact your family?
Really, I was an only child, so I didn't feel it as probably as much as people that were in the larger families or the country children. My father had worked the whole time at the highway, and mother never worked So things were probably tight, but I didn't feel it too much.
Now, you lived on Marston, which is fairly close to that north-south railroad track.
Right.
And I've heard stories that during the 1930s there were people who would ride the rails.
Hobos,
Okay.
they called them. And they would every now and then come over and knock on your door and want food. And my mother always fed them. And we weren't afraid of them at all.
And would she fix them a lunch or something?
She'd fix them sandwiches, or if she happened to have some hard-boiled eggs or something, she would add it to their lunch package. But most generally sandwiches.
And then they'd be on their way?
Right, but that house was marked. So that when anybody else come along, they knew where to get off.
So because your mother was generous once, she was probably generous.
Oh, she'd
Many
feed them
times.
every time. Whether it was the same one or somebody else.
Well, let's talk a little bit about going to Ames High School. You said that, okay, if I can get this right, the new high school, which is now the City Hall, you went to your senior year.
Right.
Do I have that right?
Right.
Okay. Well, so you got to go to a new school.
My last year.
Your last year.
September 39, and graduating in May 40.
And was it exciting to use a new building?
Yes, but I think the excitement part was our junior year, where we only went in the mornings and the junior high kids went in the afternoon. We had to share the building. So we had the afternoon to study if we would. Most generally, we were not studying.
Well, that sounds kind of fun. Apparently, they had to share the building because one was getting taken down. Is that?
Oh, the old Central building was taken down and the new one coming up, so there was no way of anybody being in the other school.
I see. And so you had to brush shoulders with the underclassmen and the little kids.
It was kind of fun, and you had to share your locker. You didn't get your locker by yourself.
Tell me about some of the classes you were taking your senior year. What would a typical young woman have for her classes? And if you can't remember exactly, that's fine. But what would be the kind of things that you would have studied?
I did the typing, shorthand, bookkeeping courses. I got my certificate for that.
And you probably already covered your history and your math and your science.
Well, you had that to take too. At least a semester of English and a semester of history.
Did you also have home economics or anything like that?
We had that in junior high.
I see. So you didn't happen to have that in high school. Because you were in dance, I'm wondering if the theater, were there any plays that you were ever in at high school? Or?
I was on stage at the theaters at New Year's Eve, and there were many New Year's Eves that I was there instead of out celebrating, And then we used to dance at bandmasters associations. We danced a lot at the city park, the city band.
Not only did that keep you trim, it probably kept you out of trouble too, because you were so busy.
That's right. There was no trouble there.
Oh, were there any high school traditions that you can remember from Ames High that from people your age might say, oh yes, I remember when they did that at Ames High back in 1939 or 1940?
I don't remember any particular tradition.
Okay.
No.
What about dating? Did you what did you particularly do for dating in high school?
Well, in high school, of course, I went with the older boys, and they always had cars. And
Now you say older.
Well, most generally they were college students.
Okay.
Or some of them that weren't in college that was working.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to Boone, to the theater, and Nevada, and lots to Des Moines, to the different activities.
Well, you had some really fun locations to go to then.
Yes, we did. But the towns weren't like they are now either. They were, smaller, and people weren't quite as crowded.
So you had, when you were in high school, you had some dates with university fellows.
Right.
Did you go any?
We went to some fraternity dances, which was fun.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing at that time, there was no liquor allowed on campus. And so all of our parties and everything were just up and up.
And they probably had chaperones.
We sure did. Yeah, they always had a house mother and chaperone. Some of the parents would be there.
What did the fraternities call their little parties?
Firesides, a lot of them.
They called them firesides.
Mm-hmm.
So they'd have records and...
Yeah, it was no band.
No band.
There.
Mm-hmm.
No band. B records.
So you probably had to have some formals or some fancy dress in your closet to do that.
Well, I had those due to Rainbow. And so it wasn't hard to manage a formal now and then.
Where did you buy your formals in Ames?
At that time, the Fair Store was on the south side of Main Street. And it was a pretty good sized store. And so most of my formals came from the Fair Store.
So your mother didn't make them. You bought them ready-made.
Yes.
Oh, that's nice. Let's talk a little bit more about shopping on Main Street, since you brought up Main Street.
Okay.
As a high school kid, did you ever go down to Main Street and have a soda or ice cream or anything like that? Did you hang out on Main Street at all?
Well, there was about 4 of us girls that were chumming together, and we would go down to what was called the M&M Grocery. And at that time, they had the dill pickles in the large jar, and that was always at the meat counter. So we'd go back and get dill pickles and go down Main Street eating dill pickles rather than candy bars.
Now that's a very sophisticated taste, rather than the sweets. Because I pictured kids going for ice cream after school.
That meat, the meat man would always say we were lovesick. That's what he'd tell us, because we were eating dill pickles. But I don't know. I think it was just our liking. Yeah, it was different down on Main Street. For the matter of fact, Morris Dairy was just diagonal across from our school on 5th. And so a lot of the kids went over there for ice cream, and here we were going downtown.
Moore's Dairy wasn't the only one.
O'Neill's, but they were up farther.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Morris actually got a little more of the business from the kids.
From the high school kids.
From
right?
high school, right. Than O'Neill's did.
Were there any other places on Main Street, maybe where high school kids would gather to have a soda or something?
Yeah, the Rainbow opened on Kellogg and Main. And so lots of times we go down there and get Cokes.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk some more about shopping on Main Street. Hardware stores. Now, your dad was handy with things. Did you ever go with him when he went hardware store shopping or anything like that?
Oh, I probably was tagging along because or Daddy when I did.
Those weren't as memorable for
you. Christensen Brothers had a hardware store, and of course car hardware. And we had dime stores. And there were a number of grocery stores on Main Street.
Tell me about that.
Well, we had the A&P grocery store, the M&M grocery store. Then we had the United Food, where my mother traded, pretty much. And then Rushing's opened a store down on the West End. And
Now, how did they all stay in business? Did each of them have something that might be a little bit better than the other one?
I don't think so. I think it was just a matter of choice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the people traded at most of them too.
Mm-hmm.
My mother went to A&P to get her coffee because she always ground the beans, But she traded the rest of the time in at United Food. We also had local neighborhood groceries.
Smaller ones.
Right, so you only had maybe a block or two to get to a grocery store if you needed a loaf of bread or something quick,
Well, picturing you on Marston, I think there was a small little grocery on 9th Street
and
Northwestern. Mm-hmm.
We traded there a lot. There was also one on 9th Street between Wilson and Grand.
Mm-hmm. Did your mother drive to those stores, or did she sometimes have groceries delivered?
Well, she had groceries delivered, but they were generally delivered from the smaller grocery store.
Mm-hmm. Not the bigger ones.
That's right.
Right. And did she probably shop more than once a week? Because it sounds like she...
Mother would go downtown almost every day. After I got in school, she'd take off.
Uh-huh. Okay, do you have any other things about Main Street that you can tell me about just from your life, young?
Well, I remember the streetcar.
Tell me about that.
That was on a line, and every once in a while, this rod that went up from the streetcar would get off of that line, and then he'd have to get out and go and put that back on the lines. But he went down Main Street to the East End, and then he would go from the front, which was the front at going east, he'd go to the west side then, go west.
Well, a lot has changed on Main Street since then.
There sure is.
Yes, indeed.
Many, many, many.
Yes. And I should have asked about shopping. Did you ever go out of town for anything? I think you mentioned you didn't really trade that much in Boone.
We went to Des Moines.
You went to Des Moines.
Mm-hmm. We went to Des Moines at least at the beginning of school year.
Mm-hmm.
Mother got most of my clothes and shoes and things in Des Moines.
Mm-hmm.
And then at Easter time we were outfitted again. And then our summer clothes.
Mm-hmm.
But after we got quite a few clothing stores here, and Mother could find things here, we remained in Ames pretty much.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to tell me about being a young person in Ames that I haven't asked you about?
I don't recall of anything other than it's a wonderful town to have children grow up in, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And the school system is very good.
Mm-hmm. Now, we'll just talk about this briefly. You did meet a nice young man at the college, and you got married.
Right.
And then you actually came back in 1950 then.
1950, we returned to Ames.
Mm-hmm.
We were married in 41.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to Winterset, Iowa as a bride, and then we located in Omaha for a while, and then he went to the service, and I really didn't think we'd get back to Ames, and I was very, very surprised. He surprised me because he called my dad and said, I'd like to see if I could get on at the highway, and of course it was the Highway Commission until about 1950 when I went to DOT.
Mm-hmm. So you came back.
So we came back to my hometown.
Well, thank you so much about sharing some of your memories of Ames. This is very valuable to me, and very, very good for people to watch this and listen and know what you got to enjoy in the 20s and 30s in Ames.
Well, thank you.
I appreciate it very much.